And we are recording. Guess what, folks? It's not a fucking Sunday. No, it fucking isn't. It's actually a Saturday, and this isn't even a WhatsApp. Why am I introducing it like a WhatsApp? What? No, that was the year that was 2022. So I was thinking about this, and there was no best of, because it was all fucking, well, it wasn't all pods, but the bulk of what I reviewed this year was pods. And here's the thing, if I had decided to open up the doors to review disposables as well, the bulk of what I would have reviewed this year would have been disposables. I must have turned down at least 40 different disposable companies this year. At least 40. I mean, some of the companies that sent out emails to UK reviewers saying that their disposable will become TPD compliant, they never appeared. They had made, and there was a bunch of companies that did this, they had made TPD compliant variants of their 50 milligram disposables that they had sold over in the United States and other countries that allow nicotine over 20 milligram. So they made TPD compliant basically samples and sent them out to reviewers in the EU and UK. And out of all those different small companies that you've never heard of, 3/4 of them never went through with the promise of actually releasing that disposable into the UK or EU. Now, this is one of the reasons that I decided to shut the doors on disposables in the first place at the very beginning of last year. Because all these companies were showing up that I've never fucking heard of, and leading into 2021, at the latter half of 2020, as the lockdowns were slowly easing off in the UK, this is when these smaller companies started popping up, and I'm going, I've never heard of you. You obviously have just started your company. You may have released a 50 milligram pod in the US that might have saved your company from going bankrupt, and now you're telling me that you're going to release a fully TPD compliant MHRA, this is what they're all saying, MHRA certified, which is fucking impossible to do, MHRA certified disposable in the United Kingdom market within 2 months of the review going up. No. I seen myself, if I opened the doors up fully to all these disposables, of reviewing disposables in 2022, 3/4 of which would never have been released in the UK in the first place. That plus, you review one disposable, you've practically reviewed about 80% of the other ones on the market. Now, I will say, there is a disposable, I think it's only one, there is a disposable review coming up in January, and that's for the Phelim disposable. Now, I did say this halfway through this year. I will only review a disposable if it brings something new onto the market. So what Phelim /Vaporesso /Smoor have decided to do is take the Phelim pod and seal it. Just lock it in place. They've basically taken a Phelim pod kit and locked the tank and essentially stuck the tank onto the battery. That's all they've basically done. But yeah, it uses the Phelim ceramic foil trace, the weird Phelim technology coil, which has always made the Phelim pods really, really good for flavour. That's for review sometime in January. And as for disposables, it's just the Phelim Tech one, and that's it. All the other ones have basically said no. And yeah, if I had opened up the doors on the channel to every single disposable that wanted a review, number one, I'd probably have lost about half my subscriber base, because nobody would want to fucking watch the channel anymore. Number two, I would have reviewed a load of disposables that would never have been released in the United Kingdom. And number three, I would probably be about £15,000 richer. Just saying it. A lot of these disposable companies were throwing money around in suitcases, especially midway through 2022. When the first signs of the disposable market collapsing in on itself started to appear in the United Kingdom, a lot of these companies started getting desperate. Literally desperate for a YouTuber, an Instagrammer, especially the Instagrammers, to review their product. There was some disposable companies that were offering Instagrammers upwards of £2,000. £2,000 just to do a that kind of okay, there's a screenshot right there. That kind of Instagram, the Instagram influencer posts that everyone knows. This is why it always pisses me off when people say, oh, YouTube reviewers, especially e-cig reviewers, make a fortune. No. You want to see who's raking it in? Try the Instagram influencers. They're really raking it in. Really raking it in. Of all the income for vaping with Vic, the bulk, and I'm talking upwards of 95% of the income on any given month on an average, 95% is from Patreon, Subscribestar and YouTube members. The other 5% is UL, who else? Aspire do now and again, but we're talking UL and Vaporesso. UL and Vaporesso, every large release that they do, not their pods, right, but every large release that they do, they usually fast track. And as everyone knows, I charge for a fast track in this channel, and it averages out about 2 fast tracks a month. Average on the channel, 2 fast tracks a month. Those 2 fast tracks won't even pay for half the rent of the studio. I'm not the one raking it in, folks. I'm not the one raking it in. You need to look to Instagram for that kind of thing, or other social media influencers. TikTok's another classic example, but apparently TikTok is cracking down on vaping on their platform now, which is why a lot of those old TikTokers are now moving over to YouTube with the YouTube short system. But yeah, a lot of these disposable companies were throwing around vast amounts of cash, especially midway through this year. Midway through this year, they started panicking because they all seen the direction that the disposable market was headed. The front half of this year could be titled, oh look, another disposable. The back half of this year could be titled, oh look, another disposable and a pod. Yay! Generation 4 of the pod market kicked off just after the kick-off of autumn, and the first signs of this was again seen midway through the year. The 2 guys and girl actually who are regular staffers at the local Vaporize shop. I usually pop into the VPZ shop every week or so just to catch up on what's happening on the ground level kind of thing, and they were saying that there is now a big uptick in people buying pods. These disposable users that were paying £5, £6, £7 per disposable every single day, treating it like a pack of cigarettes basically. I'll have a disposable, that disposable will last me for the entire day, like a pack of 20 ciggies for instance, and next day I'll go back into Vaporize and get another disposable. Then the cost of living crisis kicked in, and these disposable users that were paying, let's say on average, £5 every day for a whole month, do the math. Do the math. Even if it was one of the cheaper pods at around about £3.99 or £4 on a Vaporize sale, you're still buying that every single day. So take £5, times it by 30. That's how much that disposable user was spending in a month. In a month. Unsustainable, especially now with the cost of living crisis. Especially now with gas rates going up, electricity rates going sky high, interest rates up at 10 or 11% in the United Kingdom. Nobody can afford that. And this is when Vaporize started seeing, or VPZ, they're not called Vaporize now, this is when VPZ started seeing a massive uptick in the sales of the older Generation 3 pod kits. The likes of the Smok Novo 3 and 4, the likes of the Aspire Breeze 2, the likes of the Vaporesso X-Ross Original, not the X-Ross, I think they're up to X-Ross 3 now, but the X-Ross Original, the older Anakin kits, the Generation 2, Generation 3 pod kits that were now showing their age. And guess who figured this out? Oh yeah, you've seen it with you well. You've seen it with you well. Pod, 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 pod. You've seen it with Vaporesso. Pod, pod, AIO. Pod, pod, AIO. Pod, pod, AIO. You can mix that into a song, by the way, Flat Cap. But they've seen it as well. They've seen it as well. This is why Generation 4 of the pod market started. Generation 4 is basically, with the exception of what Smok are doing, because Smok, I don't know what the fuck they're doing, but with the exception of Smok, Generation 4 is basically the pod market reset. Because if you look at a lot of the pods that came out for Generation 4, at the very beginning of Gen 4, they were locked and sealed. Just like the Phelums, they were locked and sealed. In other words, the pod was locked and sealed. You couldn't fill it up, you couldn't take the coil out, you had to throw away the entire pod once that thing emptied out. And that was the start of Generation 4. A lot of the companies decided to hit the big reset button and go back to what Generation 1 was. And now what we're now seeing is the expansion of Gen 4 pods going into 2023. But the whole reason Generation 4 started is because of the demise of the disposable market. And the disposable market is definitely crumbling. It's definitely crumbling. There might be the Lost Marys and all the rest of those weirdly named disposables that are popping up everywhere. But the next time you walk down your local high street, and this is always the big test, the next time you're in a major town or a major city and you're walking down your local high street, have a look at what they're vaping. Number one, you will see a small increase in people using stock coil sub-ohm tank kits. Not a big increase, but you'll see one or two more people using it. Number two, you will probably see less and less brightly coloured disposables, with more people using more and more of the standard grey stainless, well, you don't get stainless steel, silver, chromium pod. Yeah, grey, black, or whatever other colours UL are doing for the fucking Caliburn these days, pod kits. Because a lot of these disposable users have ditched the disposables and moved on to the pods. And that's going to carry on into 2023 because it's cheaper. They're no longer paying on average £5 for a disposable every single day. They've paid their £19 or £20 or whatever it costs at VPZ for the latest UL Caliburn. They got a pack of coils. They got 4 bottles of 10. They got 4 bottles of 10ml, 16mg freebase juice, the house juice from Vaporized. And that's them for the whole month. The whole month. They've saved 50% right there. They've saved 50%. And it was Vaporized VPZ that were pushing this onto disposable users, saying, look, here you are paying £5 a day for this disposable kit, where you can buy either a Caliburn, one of the old Smok pod kits, one of the old Innokin pod kits. We can sell you a pack of coils as a bundle deal and chuck in 3 or 4 bottles of the House VPZ liquid at 12mg or 16mg. Yes, it's a big outlay up front, but over the course of a month, you're saving upwards of 50 to 60%. Ka-ching! Cost of living crisis was kicking in at the same time. People wanted to save money. They ditched the pods. They ditched the disposables. They're now on pod kits. Yeah, and that shift, very subtle shift, started happening midway through this month. Midway through this year. So if you go back to the middle, round about May or June, just after the UK Vapor Expo in this channel, you can see it happening. It turned into pod review, pod review, pod review, pod review, pod review. That's why I never done a best of. That's why I never done one, because it was all fucking pods. Well, it wasn't all. The bulk of what I reviewed was pods. And again, that's going to carry on into 2023. But to sum 2022 up, it could be summed up in 3 words. What the fuck? Chef's Flavours closing in the UK. What the fuck? Fastech closing in China. Who's seen that one coming? What the fuck? And it's not just Fastech. I think MyVPro. It was one of the My websites. They shut down about a month ago as well. And on top of that, GearBest, anyone remember them? GearBest shut down their vaping section at the very beginning of this year. We are seeing more and more of the large Chinese-based online vendors shutting shop. And it's got nothing to do with the disposable market. Nope, it's got nothing to do with it. What it has got to do with is the Chinese government. Remember at the beginning of this year, I said that China, the Chinese Communist Party, were instituting a lot of brand new regulations, regulations to do with excise and exportation taxes, upwards of 50%. Yeah, you heard that right, upwards of 50%. Online vendors like Fastech were going to be more heavily regulated. In other words, what online vendors had to do, what manufacturers had to do with each and every product they have in their inventory, if they are an online seller, or each and every product they're manufacturing, if they're like Geek Vape, they need to register it with the countrywide electronic cigarette registration database. A database that's run and owned by the Chinese government. That came into effect in, I think it was the 1st of October. Yeah, that came into effect in the 1st of October. Did anyone notice a sudden slowdown in release? I noticed that a sudden slowdown in releases round about midway through October. This was all these companies rushing to get their products registered with the online registration database that was being ran, or that is being ran, by the Chinese government. And it doesn't end there. One of the major reasons that sites like Fastech and GearBest decided, well, in the case of GearBest, they just got rid of the entire electronic cigarette section, but GearBest sell general electronics. That's what GearBest have always been known for. They've never been a vape shop. They're a general electronic shop. But Fastech made their name on the vape scene. If the vape section of their website was to be heavily regulated, or was going to be heavily regulated, they would feel the pinch with excise taxes, which is what the Chinese government is implementing. They've either already implemented it, or they're implementing it on the 1st of January. The Fastech closure is not going to be the last closure of the major online Chinese retailers to do with electronic cigarettes. We're going to be seeing a lot more of Fastech style shops and Fastech style online shops either severely cutting back on what they're offering or shutting shop entirely. And it's nothing to do with the disposable market. It's all to do with the regulations that the Chinese government put into place midway through this year. This is going to have a big impact on what happens in 2023. Not just because of the lack of online Chinese shops that are usually selling the kits at a discount price, but because of the knock-on effect of regulations and taxation that's going to hit the likes of Smok, Smoor, Vaporesso, Geek Vape, Vandy Vape, Vapefly. Every single company based in Shenzhen in China, or China as a whole for that matter, are going to feel the effects of this in 2023. The regulations are now fully in place, and the last of these regulations are going to be put in place either at the beginning of January 2023 or at the end of January 2023 when China comes back from their New Year spring break. No, in fact, it won't be. It'll be midway through February when China comes back from their mid-month spring break. Sorry about that. I got a text message on my phone. So yeah, spring break. When China comes back from their spring break, the full effects of what's happening with the regulations are going to take place. I'm going to say this now as well. Don't be surprised if some of the smaller e-cig companies simply don't come back. I mean, hell, if Fastech, with the amount of trade that Fastech were doing, if Fastech were basically forced to shut down, what's going to happen to some of these smaller manufacturers? There's a lot of manufacturers, the smaller ones, that have been very quiet over the past 3 or 4 months. They haven't really released much in the way of new product. And it makes me wonder if they are basically ticking along and then they're going to shut up shop during Chinese New Year, which is at the end of January going into halfway through February. It makes me wonder what kind of state the electronic cigarette base is going to be in once Chinese New Year finishes. Yeah. Again, what the fuck? What the fuck? Disposables weren't the biggest problem in the electronic cigarette industry. The biggest problem in the electronic cigarette industry is China itself, namely the Chinese government. They done something similar to this. As I said in one of the previous WhatsApps, actually, they done something similar to this to the tobacco industry, because it used to be the case that you went to China in the 19 post-war, when China's borders were still kind of open. You went to China in the 1960s and 70s, or you popped over there in the beginning of the 1980s if you were over there on a visa. You would see Marlboro, you would see John Player Specials, the cigarettes based in the UK. You would even see B&H Gold there. And in some of the bigger cities, they even had Regal King Size, which was a major, well, I don't know if it still is, but it was at the time, a major UK cigarette. Then things changed midway through 1980, going into the end of 1989. The Chinese government implemented, wait for it, a central tobacco registration database. The same kind of database that is now opened up for the Central Electronic Cigarette Registration Database. Both of these databases are ran by the Chinese government. And what China done when the database was opened up, they knew that what would end up happening, because of the new restrictions that they put in place, because of the import and export restrictions and higher tax and tariffs they put in place, number one, it stopped imports from coming in. Only the bigger cigarette companies, like Marlboro for instance, were still able to import American or British-based, like British American Tobacco, American or British-based cigarette brands. But what started to happen in China in the 90s was that supermarkets, local shops, started being flooded with Chinese-branded cigarettes. Brands that are not heard of outside of China. Not heard of them. Who owns those cigarette companies and who's manufacturing the cigarettes? The Chinese government. The Chinese government has a monopoly, literal monopoly, on the tobacco industry in China, and it started with the Central Registration Database. Now, is the Chinese government trying to monopolise the electronic cigarette industry? Not right now, but I think what they're doing with the implementation of the more stricter rules, with the implementation of the centralised database, I'm thinking they're trying to cut out the smaller players. I'm thinking that's what they're doing. Which is kind of the same thing that they done with the tobacco industry. There used to be hundreds of small tobacco companies, small tobacco manufacturers in China. When that database was implemented and the tax restrictions and levies were upped, lots and lots of those smaller companies either folded or were gobbled up by the larger Chinese conglomerates. And I think you're going to start seeing that with the Chinese electronic cigarette industry as we go further into 2023. You're going to start seeing the smaller players close up shop. You're going to start seeing the bigger players like Smoor, who already own Relics, Phelim and Vaporesso, hoovering up all the smaller companies. You'll see Smok and Vaporesso vie for position. You will see Innokin and Aspire vie for position. You will see Vandivape, admittedly a larger company than they used to be, but still one of the smaller players, trying to protect themselves from getting gobbled up by one of the bigger players. It's a repeat of what happened to the Chinese cigarette industry. It's an exact repeat. The tax levies that were implemented and the export levies that were implemented and import levies that were implemented for the tobacco sector was actually far worse than what they've done for the electronic cigarette sector. So it makes me look at this and think maybe what the Chinese government is trying to do is get rid of the cowboy outfits, the small-time players, and have the electronic cigarette industry essentially ran in China by the big conglomerates. or the bigger companies like Smoor that already own Relics and Phelim and Vaporesso, like Smock, like Innikin, like Aspire, like Geek Vape, the big well-known brands, and have them essentially self-regulate. That could be the road they're going down. I don't know though. But when I seen the news of this central database being implemented this year, that's when it clicked. They'd done the same fucking thing to the tobacco industry, and in less than 10 years the Chinese government essentially bought out the entire tobacco industry in China. They essentially bought it out, which meant they were free to do whatever they needed to do. Did you know that 80% of the extracted nicotine that's available either in freebase or salt base, namely freebase, we're talking about the raw nicotine here that's extracted and then shipped out to the likes of Chemnavatic. Did you know that 80% of the raw nicotine extraction is being done in China? The other 20% is split between the United States, although I don't think do they even have nicotine extraction plants in the US now? There was one about 5 years ago, but I don't know if that's still open. But there was one, or there might still be one in the US, and there's a couple in the Middle East, and there's a couple in Europe. But the bulk of nicotine extraction takes place over in China. They extract the raw nicotine, unadulterated, and then it gets shipped out to the likes of Chemnavatic, who distill it down and then redistill it into nic salt, or remake it into nic salt, or distill it into freebase nicotine. 99.9% pure freebase nicotine. So it makes you wonder what the future's going to hold for 2023. There is no getting round it. The disposable market is collapsing. There's no ifs or buts now. It is definitely collapsing. Generation 4 pods are now taking over, and what we could be looking at is a repeat and rinse of 2019, where 2019 what manufacturers like UL done was flood the market, because let's face it, they've done it this year, flood the market with loads of new pods to an extent that the pod market was completely oversaturated. Then they panicked, and 2019 is when you started seeing the likes of the Valkyrie kit, the UL Crown kit, the resurgence of the Gen kit going into 2019-2022, the resurgence of the Gen kit, the resurgence of the older Target kits. Smock went back to their old ways of mod. We might see that in 2023 because Generation 4 pods are not as sustainable, as in market-wise, selling-wise, they're not as sustainable as Generation 1 and 2 pods were, because the influx of smokers who are switching to vaping has now slowed down to a snail's pace. This is what these companies like UL, Smock and Vaporesso were relying on with churning out pod after pod back in 2019. Lots of smokers switching to vaping. That's not happening now. It's basically plateaued off. For all intents and purposes, at least here in the UK, it's basically plateaued off. Stop smoking services are now finding it more difficult to get the hardened smokers, because that's what's left, the hardened smokers, to get them off smoking. They're finding it more and more difficult to do that. And because of the lack of new vapors coming in, the sustainability for selling Generation 4 pod kits is going to be a lot shorter than it was for Generation 1 and Generation 2. So what we could be seeing in May of this year, around about the time the May Expo happens actually, what we could be seeing in the May Expo of this year is the slowdown of Generation 4 pods. We could be. Now, the big question is, what's going to replace it? That's the big question. What's going to replace it? Is it going to be a case of AIOs, or are the manufacturers going to skip the AIO phase and go to single or dual battery stock coil sub-ohm tanks, which I'm hoping they start fucking doing again, because I'm actually starting to miss mod reviews. It's like a mod review on the channel's become a special fucking event. That's what it's become. I'm hoping that as the Generation 4 pod kit market slows down, Smock go back to single and dual battery box mods, Vapor SO, Geek Vape and all the rest of them start to do the same thing. But we can only wait and see, folks. That's all we can do. We can only wait and see. As for me and the channel, well, there is changes afoot. You've probably noticed a couple of the changes that have taken place in the reviews that went up last week. I've started doing an uncut an uncut and the edit long continuous take. So basically, I hit record. You even see the clap, and I just shove it in Adobe Premiere Pro, top it, tail it, and upload it. It's meant that editing times for the reviews is now down to about 20 minutes, if that, 20 minutes. But you're also seeing the entire recording process as is. In other words, I do the intro bit, I do this review, cut in the intro, and from after the intro to the very end where I'm saying thanks to the Patreon folks, that's one long continuous take. I stand up and go to the green screen, I walk from the green screen to the table, I stand up from the table cam and go back to the FaceTime cam. All one long continuous take. It also means if I fuck something up, you're going to see it, because it's going to be an obvious jump cut. It's like obvious jump cut. You're going to see it. But for me, doing the long continuous take system has always been easier for me. It's always been easier. I used to do it in blocks. I used to do the table cam recordings on a Thursday and the FaceTime recordings on a Friday, but now I'm just doing everything in the one day. Well, not the one day, I'm doing everything split between Wednesday and Thursday, which leaves Friday clear to do the editing. You've seen that change take place. There is some reworkings of the broadcast screen and OBS stuff for the UK Vape Show that you'll be seeing on Thursday. I will be a little bit more active on social media, starting next week, actually, when the first reviews pop up, because I've got a couple of new additions to the review packages. One of them being a social media package, which is chucked in with the fast track system. It's chucked in with the fast track system, and there's a mini social media package that's chucked in with the free review package as well. So you're going to start seeing me use social media like Twitter, Instagram, that kind of thing, a little bit more frequently than I am doing right now. In other words, you'll see pictures of products being popped up. Simple as that, folks. Simple as that. And I think, at least for the front half of this year, for the front half of 2023, that basically covers it. It's a couple of tweaks to the channel. Just some small tweaks that I'm doing to the channel. Anyway, I hope everyone out there had a wonderful and happy Christmas, and I hope everybody watching this and your families are going to have a wonderful, prosperous and safe 2023. That is it from me, folks. Reviews will be mostly back to normal next week. Again, Scotland, we get a slightly extended holiday, so I really don't go back to the studio. I don't go back to the studio until Wednesday, is it? I'm trying to remember how this... Yeah, it's going to be Wednesday the 4th. Yeah, because Sunday's New Year's Day, and because New Year fell on a weekend, Monday's an automatic bank holiday. Tuesday is a run-through bank holiday. Yeah, back to studio on Wednesday, I think. I'll need to check that, actually, because I don't want to fucking stand there at the bus stop like a fucking lemon and no buses turn up because they're all on fucking holiday. I'll need to check that. But yeah, reviews will be mostly back to normal next week, folks, along with the UK Vape Show. That's it for me, folks. As always, thanks for watching and have a good one.